Today we're interviewing in Aspen, Colorado. I'm very pleased to be talking today with Jack Lesberg, who is a bass player who has played on hundreds of records, and probably we've heard you numerous times on TV shows and all those kinds of things, and maybe not knowing who it was, but...
Yeah, very possible.
Yeah. You have had a very interesting career, been around the world. Now I've got your hand in actually organizing festivals too.
Right.
You have enough to do these days.
Yeah, well, I've enjoyed it. It's always been fun calling. It's always fun trying to call somebody you like and tell them you got a job for them.
Yeah.
To work.
That does feel good.
It's kind of fun. I enjoy doing it.
Uh-huh. When you were a youth, and was there music in your house a lot?
Quite a bit, yeah. Actually, my brother was a professional violinist. He was about, let me see, David, he was about 13, 14 years older than I am. He was born in Russia. Actually, he came from, I was born in Boston in 1920. And my sister also played the violin. And I also took the violin. There's about 6 or 7 years between us. There's quite a spread in the family there. And I played the violin and viola and studied with a very fine teacher in Boston. Carl Barleben was his name. He was with the Boston Symphony Orchestra under Carl Muck. Goes way back to those kind of names. He was and he was 80 years old at that time. Carl Barleben was.
Uh-huh.
And so my brother and sister had both studied with him previously. And I played the violin and viola. Studied with him for about, I guess, 5 years or 6 years, and I played it around Boston in a couple of restaurants. So they had a little incidental music during the dinner hour or something like that. And then I went on and I played it in clubs. They had after-hour clubs. An after-hour club was one that opened about 11 or 12 o'clock at night when the legitimate clubs, so to speak, were closing, and you could get a drink in there.
Mm-hmm.
And they had trios or quartets that consisted of either violin and a cello, not a cello, violin and guitar and bass. Occasionally a piano might have been in there. And people used to come in there, and they were quite orderly places, and we worked, and they must have had about 18 or 20 of them all around the Boston area. They were very popular. And they would stay open until about 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning. And that's what I used to do when I was going to my early years at English high school.
No kidding.
Yeah.
How did you stay awake in class?
Well, it was just amazing. I was pretty good, fortunately. I was pretty good with my studies, too, so I used to do most of the homework, on the study periods.
Right.
And I managed to get out of the military training. They didn't think I was too good at that, so I had an extra study period there. So
you had military training in the school?
They had a training. It was a boys' school, English high school. Yeah. They had a girls' version of it as well there, but they were city schools, very large schools.
Did the music that you played earlier in the day differ from the music that you played in the after-hours club?
Well, yeah, because I was playing with these wonderful little groups. They were marvelous guitar players, like Bucky that you know here. They were those kind of players, family players that all played in the family. Everybody in their family played guitars, mostly Italian families. And they were brilliant players, really. They just learned well, it just was handed down in the family. And I had formal training, with Carl Barleben during those days, and it was just great to fall in, to be able to play with these wonderful guitar players. And I did that for quite a while until at one period there, it's kind of a funny story, I wound up joining a group called the Strings of Romance, which was, you take that however you like.
No.
A couple of
I like that
Don't
name.
touch it, huh? Okay. Yeah, well, it consisted of a couple of guitars, and one of the guitarists played the mandolin, I played the violin, and they had a chap there that played the bass, but not too good, really, kind of poorly, and the manager of this little restaurant that we were playing in out there decided he could save a few by just having me play the bass. I'd sit in and
Oh.
touch the bass a little bit while he sang, you know. And so anyways, I wound up getting to the bass then, and it was kind of an easy transition for me. You know, most of these other players that I was playing with, the guitar players, they all played the bass too. They all just played it by root, you know. They just had the ears for the chords and the changes and
Yeah.
the intonation. They all got nice sounds on it. And so I started playing the bass at that period when I was about 18 years old, while playing the violin as well. And then I wound up I worked in some of those clubs again, playing the bass, and I wound up working at the Coconut Grove, which you've probably heard, and I was in the Coconut Grove fire when in I guess it was 42, November 28th, I guess. And it was a very tragic fire.
Yeah.
If you remember, there were 3 or 4.
How did you
dead
manage
people.
to...
I was carried out of there. I was carried out unconscious, and I was quite ill there in the hospital for about a month or so.
Oh.
And I survived it fine, and my lungs and everything cleared out, and I made my way out of there. And this time I was already playing the bass, because I'd been playing floor shows there with it and doing all kinds of other things, and I didn't really start studying the bass formally. I did have this other training. I studied the piano as well earlier when I was a kid. And when I got to New York, I went to New York in about 1944, and there was this marvelous array of teachers and everything, and amongst them was Fred Zimmerman, one of the best.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the way to go. I just inquired around, and I went to him, and I studied with him for about 7 years. And we got along famously, and he was very, very, very wonderful, dedicated teacher, and young guy, and young at heart, and one of those kind of guys, you know. And he taught practically everybody. He taught at Juilliard as well. But I studied privately with him, and I was lucky enough to have him for those several years. Quite a few, almost all the bass players went to him. He was that good.
So you worked on the technique of the bass with him, and your jazz playing, was that something you worked on with him, or was that more self-taught?
Well, the jazz playing, not so much with him, no. He had a feel for it. You know, he was with the Philharmonic, and he taught at Juilliard during that period. He wasn't a jazz player, but he was loose, you know. He was a good golfer. He was a marvelous painter, and he loved the bass. He adored the bass, and he was just. I used to study privately with him. He taught at Juilliard, but I just studied privately with him. And he was, as time went on, he was very kind to me, and I used to come in evenings, and he'd play duets with me and things like that. And then eventually, he even recommended me to take his place with the Bell Telephone Hour. He was playing on that show. Donald Voorhees was a conductor. I don't know, you wouldn't have remembered it, but it was fine. They were all NBC. Yeah. When I came to New York in 44, 45, I was very lucky, and I got on a staff job at NBC, which meant that I had a steady job for that period. And I also got a chance to play with the NBC Symphony, and as well as the dance orchestra. Eddie Safransky and I were the hot guys, and they would add us to the other 6 who were playing with the NBC orchestra.
Uh-huh. Is that the term they used, the hot guys?
Well, maybe. No, I think that's my own. No, we weren't that hot, you know. But we did play with the dance orchestra,
Yeah.
you know. They'd have Bing Crosby come out. But these were all staff programs, you know, not so much. It was all radio just then. And I had a lot of experience with that. I stayed with the station there just for a short period. You know, I was taking the serviceman's place. He was called to service, and that's how I got the job.
I was going to ask you if the war years affected you.
Well, the Coconut Grove helped me get out of the, you know, it wasn't much of a help in the fire,
Yeah.
but it did get me out of going into service. And they were all ready to take me until I told them that I didn't think they were being real nice to me about it. I'd gone through the fire and everything else, and after I had tried to get in, I was rejected then.
Oh.
At that time, and I says, after I go through the fire, you think I'm in pretty good shape. I says, I don't get it, you know. And besides supporting my mother and father, and so anyways, they let me out of that, and then I went to New York, and these things happened, and I was very lucky. I got on the staff, as I say, at NBC, and was let go eventually, and I opened the Eddie Condon Club in 1945, and that was just a whole, whole thing with running into just about everybody in the jazz, jazz affair.
That was quite a time, I guess, and the whole Condon aura. You know, I mean, was it as interesting as they say?
It was very interesting, and I'm having a second awakening with it because it's so many years ago, and it's just so hard to remember so much of that. During that period, we had done a whole gang of radio shows for the armed services with Eddie Condon. And a fellow by the name of Ernie Anderson was a marvelous promoter and a marvelous entrepreneur. And he had organized these things where they played for the armed service. We played for the armed services. We had weekly programs, you know, with people like Ernie Caceres and Jack Teagot and Louis Armstrong, Jess Stacy, the names galore, as you know, they're all historical more or less now. And I had a chance to play with all of them, and they've just released I just got a whole bunch of CDs from them that have just been released by some chap down in St. Louis. I just can't think of his name offhand. And boy, I've been listening. They're just a ball. They're recorded marvelously. Yeah, especially these the ones that were made in the last few years. I guess Ernie Anderson had spent quite a length of the last years of his life. He just died this past year, and but he evidently spent a lot of time and used his knowledge and common sense in getting good engineers, and especially the last few of them are very well recorded, and it's really a kick just sitting there. I spend hours just listening to them. I even play with them a little bit just for practice, you know, just to see what you were doing.
See if you can keep up with yourself.
It's pretty easy, yeah. It's just trying to find, I just fall into the same lines that I was playing in those days. It's pretty funny.
That's great.
Yeah, just ball.
Condon wasn't known for his soloing, but he certainly was a catalyst.
Oh, yeah. Oh, he was a terrific catalyst, yeah. And he was fun. And no, he wasn't a great player or anything, but he did have there were certain things that he enjoyed, and they were great jazz things, like having people like Lee Wiley as one of the singers, and having and Louis Armstrong on the program, and Jack Teagot, I think, was recording for some company. They couldn't use his name, and so they called him Pete Pesky or something like that. And he's on all the way through this. He played the trombone, and Ernie Caceres was one of them. But they're all just marvelous, famous names those days. And I was just, 25, 35, whatever it was there, so I can't figure it out now.
Mid-40s.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
What was a night of work at Condon's like? What time did you start?
Well, you had to be in pretty good shape to take it, because there's plenty of drinking going on there, and smoking cigarettes and what have you there. There was a lot of action going there all the time, but it was fun, and all the musicians came in there. And I met Leonard Bernstein there. He loved jazz music. And he used to come in through the back door, underneath door. It was just fun. He knew where the door was, and he got along famously with Eddie. Eddie was he was terrific. These guys, they just thought he was the best thing since cream cheese.
Yeah.
They had a lot of fun with him. And Leonard and, this is a marvelous composer. I think it was David Diamond was his sidekick then.
Oh.
And I used to come in there quite often, and I eventually, Leonard asked me he says, why don't you go and audition? He knew I was studying with Fred, and he says, why don't you go and audition he was taking over the City Center Symphony.
Oh.
And you know, I had a feel and background with this kind of music just from my studies that I had been going through then, and the violin and viola that I'd studied previously. And so, and I was studying with Fred at the time, and so after about a year or so, I didn't pick him up on it the first year, but the second year that I was there, I went up and auditioned for him, and this was a City Center Symphony that he conducted for about 3 years, and it was a marvelous orchestra. They played a lot of the standard repertoire of those days, and you know, all the Bach and Beethoven and all this. Plus, he always loved to get something modern in there. You know.
Some of his own work, perhaps?
Well, yeah, there was some of that, and David Diamond was a marvelous composer, and they would do some of his things. And they just loved the idea of having, you know, having a hot cat down there, you know, and they really enjoyed it, you know. They used to have a lot of fun out of it all.
And while you were doing that, you're still playing in the evenings?
I started, well, I didn't stay at Condon's very, very long after that. I got quite busy with studios, and I wound up, I did the original Milton Berle show, when it went color, with color TV. That started a whole new era there, and I was on Bell Telephone Hour and the Hit Parade with Raymond Scott for a number of years. I did, and I freelanced. I found I preferred freelancing. I missed a couple of good things that I would wanted to do, and when you were on staff there, you could only work a certain number of days. It had certain limitations. It was very little money that they paid you for this on the staff basis. I mean, it was not bad for those days. Probably $125 a week and you put in about 4 hours a day, 3 or 4 hours a day, or maybe less if you weren't busy. Right. And you could do other work. But anyways, that's the way it went on during those days. I've had some wonderful breaks in my life.
Well, gee, I was looking a little discography and so forth, and during the 40s alone, you were with Louis Armstrong and Teagarden and Coleman Hawkins and Sidney Bechet and Sarah Vaughan, and
Sarah,
either you couldn't hold a job or people liked you.
So I played her audition. I forget, Leonard Feather had her up there, and they had Georgie Auld was playing. We didn't get any money for her. We were just, and she was about 15 years old. She was a scrawny little gal, and I got to know her very well later. And yes, she came to Australia when I lived there, and I did tours with her for George Wein later on, and so it was a wonderful relationship, knowing people that of different parts of the jazz music and the scene. You know, people like Ruby Braff and you know, some unusual musicians.
When you went to do the studio work for different artists, you basically show up at the time appointed, and they put the music in front of you, and you were expected to do it right. Yeah,
they were either, you know, commercial recordings, and they'd have vocalists that you were accompanying, or pop songs that were getting popular at that time, or they were trying to make popular, and jingles with the television era was a whole different gang of work, you know. They were usually bookings for an hour or an hour and a half, and those musicians were all fantastic. They were mostly dance guys. Many of them played with the symphony as well, but mostly those kind of players. And she'd come in for a 1 hour jingle or something like that to do a couple of spots, and maybe with 1 hour with a possible 15. That's the way they were booked. 1
hour with possible 15.
Yeah, that was the popular phrase from Radio Registry. You know, an hour and a half or 2 hours with a possible 20.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So they built that into the studio schedule where that might go 15 minutes
into their schedule and into your schedule, so that you know, you can. If they didn't book you for that time, if it came to that time, you say, "Well, I'm sorry, I got one across the street." That's the way the guys were working. You know, they'd get all these little checks later on and take them right to the bar and cash them and drink them up.
And was there a place that you fellas would hang out?
Oh yeah.
And you'd get a phone call?
Oh, they're famous places. Yeah. Well, Jim and Andy's was one of the later one of the more popular ones because he would just see and Hurley's still exists at the corner of 50th and 6th Avenue. It's a little corner-shaped building, and the Hurley family owned it, an Irish family. And when they built the RCA building there, they wouldn't sell. Oh. And if you ever go by the building, you'll notice that that corner building is a two-story brownstone that's right into the RCA building still all these years. And that family just owned it all that time, and they were marvelous characters. And these shows like the Hit Parade, and in the early days of the Hit Parade, they used to do two shows on it. You'd do an early show that went out to the audience around the eastern part of the country, and then they would do one at 9:30 or something that went out to California. They were done live. They didn't have quite figure out how to do it on tape. They didn't have tape. Right. They didn't have that thing going there. And there's quite a difference between the night show and the early show and the late show, because they'd spend the whole intermission at Jim and Andy's or Hurley's. But they were wonderful players. A lot of guys like McGarity and Irby Green and all the wonderful players were part of the orchestra. Raymond Scott was his brother had died, who was the early conductor of the Hit Parade. And it was just a lot of fun with these guys.
So if someone in the producer in the studio had a need all of a sudden for a bass trombone player, could they just call this place?
They'd have a contractor who acted as their contractor, or people that they knew and knew from working other programs. One led to another after a while. And they used strings a great deal, you know, for backing up, you know, what they were trying to do and trying to glamorize the products and so forth. And they wound up with, you know, it was nothing that you wouldn't find the concertmaster of the Philharmonic playing in the jingle, because you know, they'd go in there for an hour and they'd make more than they made with the orchestra for a week. That's the way it was then. I mean, it finally has changed since then, of course.
What was scale back then?
Well, I can't remember exactly. I think it was rands. It might have run somewhere anywhere from $40 to $50 for the hour, or something like that. Then the overtime went things. So if you went in for a couple of hours, it could be $100 or $75. Those things kept, and they had residuals to them as well. That had, if they were used over a 10-week period or something like that, why there would be another part. So you'd go in at the union after 10 weeks or some time, you'd be apt to find repayments on some of these, that, you know, cigarette commercials and things like that were going on. And you, as I told you, you would just run to Jim and Andy's with all of those immediately. That was like found money, you know, lots of nice drinks.
Productive time for music.
Yeah, it was exciting. It was exciting.
For musicians, anyway.
Yeah, it was exciting. The guys were all full of fun, I think, and hung together, and they're a good lot, really.
Milt Hinton credits you with a big break in his career.
Yeah.
How did
He's
that
a dear
come
friend.
about? Yeah.
Well, I had a chance to recommend him. There was a period then when I was doing the Hit Parade and some of these other programs that when television started, you know, there was a thing, a lot of these commercials, like cigarette commercials, of course, they had didn't like the idea of having blacks on their program. It wasn't, you know, they didn't want to, coming from where the tobacco came from, and it was against their principles and so forth. So there was that kind of thing that was going on for a while. And also with Milt was the fact that he came after I'd been there for quite a while. I was quite established as a studio player, you know, that's the way it went. And I had a chance to recommend Milt to one of the shows that I was leaving. And it worked, and it was a big start. He'd been there for a long time and just couldn't crack that. Milt is a very marvelous man. He's a extremely talented guy and a very inner strength. He's just terrific. And he played very well. He did everything that he was supposed to do, and he did it the right way. He just went out and did it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he got himself the instruments. He went to the places where the guys were, and he was just great. He just fell in it, and you couldn't catch him after that. He was just...
He was on the fast
track.
track.
He was gone. Oh, yeah, he was in with some hot things. Of course, Bob Haggart is one of our crew. He was one of the first around those years, too. Yeah.
Well, Milt then was one of the first black musicians to crack the market, so to speak.
He was, yeah. There was a couple of guys where the hit parade finally took some on. I just can't think of some of the names. I can see their faces, but just get by me for a minute.
What was the women's... Housewives Protective League?
I don't... Where'd you hear that? I'm not familiar with that.
I thought there was a TV show or something that you were on.
Housewives Protective League. Tell me a little more. Maybe it'll...
well, it's something I read out of Milt's book, actually.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, and he said that something about you were doing two shows and you had to choose between one or the other. And
yeah, well, that's where... that's right. That's where I had the chance to turn him on, and of course that was a great step for him, he felt.
Yeah.
But as I say, he just didn't need much coaching after that.
Yeah.
He was gone.
Because then he talks about getting into that life where he was doing 3 sessions a day.
Right,
and,
yeah.
you know, he had to have a couple bases in different parts of the
Oh,
city.
he was terrific. Yeah, he had it worked out. We all did.
Yeah.
He had some little guy who just used to pick them all up and move them after a while. I don't know how he'd get them. He'd go downstairs with a baritone and a bass and saxophones and squeeze them all into a taxi somehow or other and get them down to the date. Yeah, it was pretty hilarious, really. You just call them the night before. It was kind of fun on the system. The radio registry was the big answer. It's before the answer phones. I wish they were still there in that way. But you could just tell them you were going to be out of town, or I'll be at Jim and Andy's from 5 till 9, or something like that.
Well, gee, that way you get to talk to a person when you call them, and they know where you are.
Oh, it was marvelous.
Instead of getting an answer machine, you don't know when people are going to call you back.
The machine has actually been drives me crazy. I never get it right.
Right.
I'm always messing it up, you know. And I think I haven't, and especially at this stage of life, there, my memory plays a lot of games with me.
Yeah, right.
And, you know, you tell me your number or your name, and I've immediately forgotten it by the time I hang up. You know, it's a big drag.
Well, gosh, you've been around the world a number of times with
I'm
Louis
lucky.
Armstrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me about some of your favorite.
Well, the one with Louis, I was originally called for with Louis. This goes back to Ernie Anderson. Also, Louis came in town. He had done a movie. Billie Holiday was in the movie. I forget the other name of the actor. It was in the 40s.
Oh yeah. Was that St. Louis Blues or
something like that? And what's the name? Billie Holiday was in the picture as well. And I was working at Condon's at the time, and Ernie Anderson thought it'd be a marvelous idea for Louis to have the All-Stars. That's when that concept came up, and Ernie was very much behind that thing. Louis was managed by Joe Glazer for the years. He owned him, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
Awful term, but it was a fact. You know?
Right.
And Ernie had talked him into trying that. And they wanted me, Arvell Shaw was working with Louis' band. Louis had a big band in those days. And this during the days I was still connected with Eddie Condon a lot, you know. But I was pretty busy with the studios and the jobs that they were going out for a tour. They had fixed up a tour to try it, I think. Ernie finally got, I think, Earl Hines and Louis and too sure. Edmund Hall was on it with me when I went later on. I think Bonnie Begod and Velma Middleton. I think they fixed up about a 6-piece band, and they went out. And they went over there supposedly for about 2 or 3 weeks, and I think they were there for 6 months. Every time they went to get on a plane to go back, one of the other countries wanted to take them, and it kept on. So it became a thing, and I felt very much left out. I just couldn't leave my this was bread and butter and starting a family and all that stuff, and much as I love to. So anyways, a period went by there until finally around, I worked with Louis a lot and made records with him. I did some single dates with him, but then he was finally had they called me to go to Australia with him for a tour, and then they came back and went to Great Britain, and then to Africa. From there was about a 3-month period. And I finally I just went to Raymond Scott, and I says, I just got a call to do this thing. I've been waiting to do it, and whether you let me go or not, if you want to fire me, I says,
I have to
be
do
my
this.
guest. So he was very nice. He let me off for about 3 months or so, and I did this tour. And we went to Africa, and it was just all very, very exciting. And I remember it all so well, that part of it. It was just really thrilling. And he wanted me to come back with them. They were coming back to play one of the outdoor concerts with Leonard Bernstein, and I guess the word was around. Leonard found out that I was with Louis now, and he thought, it would be just a wonderful tie-in, with Louis and having him there and having me there, having been with him before and all that, because I did know him quite well at that time. We were friends. He was really a swell guy. He was very nice. He actually put me on as associate principal when I went with the orchestra.
To the
City Center Symphony.
Oh.
When I went with him, he was just very kind to do that, and it just gave me a lot of extra courage, really, to keep moving with it. But that was the start of the All Stars of that period there that I didn't go on, and then later on, Louis went on. I played quite a bit with him after that, and then I did move to Australia. I loved it there, and I moved there, I think, in the early 70s for about 5 years, and I played with the Sydney Symphony, auditioned for them, and I played with them. And
was there a jazz scene in Australia?
Oh, yes, there is, yeah. One of this chap that's playing with us now was in the quartet that I had
Oh, Bob Bernard?
Bob Bernard, yeah. Yeah, I got a job at the American National Club, and didn't pay hardly anything, but I had that with the symphony, and I didn't accept the position as on a steady basis. I left it open in case I wanted to get away or go back. I just, part of my nervousness from freelancing, figured I might lose something, you know. But in fact, I loved Sydney, and I'm sorry I left, and I would have loved to stay there. I've made many friends there, and it's a nice country, it really is. But I did come back. I'll do marital stuff, and came back, I guess, around the close to 1980, and then I got some calls to tour Europe, and I was just free to do it. Then I was on my own again, so that's about where we leave off.
We've arrived in Aspen.
And Aspen is almost over. I've been doing these parties for a long time, too.
Well, there seems to be a healthy, I'm not sure about the whole state of jazz, but there seems to be a healthy interest in the veteran musicians and, the music they've been playing for years.
Yeah. You mean as far as the jazz? I think so, yeah. I think so. They're just these wonderful players like we have here. You see some of the faces that are up there. The guys, I don't know if it's any they're older than me, but pretty close.
Yeah. When you look at the future of this mainstream jazz, if we want to call it, you can use that term, I suppose. What do you see for it in the future?
Tough question for me to answer. I just don't know what I can't give you a real thought. You know, I find myself in the position now, you know, where I'm sort of at the, just hanging on with it a little bit, you know, with all the younger people, as it was when I was hot coming through at the time, you know. That goes on now, and they like to stick together, and no matter how you put it, they'll go through it too, you know.
Yeah. Well, there's some great young players out there. I
Sure.
hope we get a great young audience for them.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. You mean talking about here now?
Here.
Oh yeah. Oh, these people here are they just love you, boy. It's just out of sight
Yeah.
with them.
They're so into it, you know.
Oh,
they
they're
just
so real, man.
respond to the solos.
They're so,
and all that.
they just love it, boy. They're really fans.
Yeah.
Oh.
Out of all the people you've played with, does a couple numbers of them stand out as far as their sense of humor?
Pretty tough to beat the one right at the beginning there with Eddie Condon,
Yeah.
because that was a laugh a minute in those days. And everybody was having a ball and doing everything, and you know, I'd go to work sometimes at night and get home 3 days later. You know, it was.
Somehow
It was
you
just-
wonder how you survived that, huh?
Well, it was good. Didn't hurt yourself. It was just fine. You know, those days New York was easy. You could go out at night. It wasn't if you hung out at night or if you wound up in Harlem, as they say, or things like that, and visiting some of those clubs where you got to see. I worked with James P. Johnson and Willie Smith. My first job in New York, when I came in there, they were playing two pianos in there. Maxie Kaminsky had just come back from with Artie Shaw's band, and he put a band together, and there was Willie Smith and Rod Class, I remember, myself, and a couple of guys, and James P. Johnson and the Lion with the two pianos. They had a grand piano and an upright piano, and Willie played intermission, and they would open at 7 o'clock at night, and they'd play till 5, 6 in the morning, and all these, fantastic piano players would come in. You know, Duke, all of them. They came. These were the daddies. You know.
Yeah.
And those were the days. You know, when you're living around those days and go in to do the people that were on. We talk about Jack Teagardens and Hackett and Benny Goodman and you know, really giant players. So many that you're coming across. I don't know whether you top those periods.
Mm-hmm.
These records are a kick listening back to it and listening what you were doing and playing and those guys were good. You know, they were peppy. You know, they really came in. Ernie Caceres, a baritone saxophone, was just irreplaceable. Some of these guys, they're just. Joe Temple just talks about Ernie Caceres as if, that he missed him. He was just, you know, just so sad about.
Yeah.
He just adored, you know, this guy was great.
Well, we do refer to as the golden age
I guess so.
of jazz.
Well, I'm having a big kick listening to some of these, listening to these tapes again. And Lee Wiley was on these things. I get a big charge out of listening to what I was doing and the, you know, the intensity of it, and it just seemed to roll off you. And a lot of it is very close to the way I read my lines and things like that today. Yeah.
Who were did you have influences on the bass? People that you emulated?
One of the first guys I came across, and he was about my age, or a little bit younger, was Ray Brown. Because when I left Condon's, and the bit was at Condon's there that they finally let the bass go down there to save some money. save a salary because everybody that came in there sat in on the bass, so they figured they can get the bass for free. See,
Yeah.
so I always used to say they cut the strings at Eddie Condon's.
Oh no.
That was my line. And I don't know what the hell I was trying to say, but.
Ray Brown, we were talking.
Yeah, Ray. I went up to work on 52nd Street, and I played with Teagarden and Maxie and Peanuts Hucko and Cliff Lehman, whose wife is here, and Louis came in, sat in, and played with us, and at the Famous Door is where I was working, and. But 52nd Street was just full of those places,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And, Billie Holiday was singing in one corner, and just walk down the street there, coming in and stand across the street and hear who you want to hear from the other place.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really a kick, 52nd Street. You'll never see that again.
Uh-huh. Yeah, some of us were born in the wrong era, I
those
think.
streets, when you walk down 52nd Street today, I go by those, I know just with the block that they were in, and I say, oh, it's too bad.
Oh, yeah. Well, at least you got to experience it
Yeah.
and be part of it.
But those were the people. I remember seeing Ella walking down the street, going to work, singing some of the tunes as she's walking along, that's just running through her head, you know, and
Yeah.
just having a good time. And it was quite exciting days, and everybody going to those wonderful little bars around the corner and so forth.
Well, I think you've done a great job here in Aspen, having a hand in mixing and matching the musicians.
Yeah, well, I've enjoyed doing that. It wears your head down, you know. I mean, to try to do it is when it finally gets to a point where you have so many musicians and such a limited time.
Yeah.
You know, and you start figuring the time of changing from one band to another band. It's quick, but when you think of the time that you're fooling with, you know, I mean, we used to spend that much time just talking in between tunes.
Right,
you know?
sure. And you want to give everybody a little solo spot.
So you're trying to do this and just keep away from the. You know, you can get at the band. You always try to open it a little bit here and there for a bit, and when the more players you have, the tougher it gets to try to do it in a period of time. You know, you kind of wish you could.
Yeah.
But it works. And the people provide all the other, the human part of it.
What's in the immediate future for you?
Yeah. I just hope I can keep playing. I love to play.
Uh-huh.
And as I say, I very fortunately still have some contacts and get over to Europe a bit and occasionally for a tour. And I've been over with Ralph. He's quite busy in that area, and we're old buddies, and I work with him quite often.
Mm-hmm.
And I just hope it keeps moving. I spend some time, I like to practice. And a couple of guys around New York, John Bunch being one of them, who lives nearby, and he has a big Steinway in his living room, and he's got a bass that I strung up. It's in the corner there.
Uh-huh.
And so he's got some time. He likes to play. He doesn't like to practice, but he likes to play.
Yeah.
So I like to practice, I do, but I like to play. Of course, that's important. So he'll call, you feel like it? I say, okay. And I just jump on the tram. I live over Roosevelt Island.
Uh-huh.
And I just hop up there and take off my hat and coat, and we play for 2 hours. Say see you, goodbye.
Well, I'm glad you haven't lost that passion. That's
That's
great.
it's important.
Yeah.
It's the only way to. And also, I like to play some of the symphonic music again. That's a very wonderful, rewarding part of it. It's difficult, and to keep your attention and keep together and all that stuff with other instruments. Everybody, I look at these bandstands, and everybody's trying to squash in, get near the piano and all that. And I go crazy there, trying to figure out a corner for me to squeeze in there. Yeah. You go out in the symphony there, you got a block long of violins, and nobody's having any problem at all.
That's a luxury.
Anyhow. Well,
Well,
thanks for giving me the chance to talk about it.
Yeah,
I enjoy talking about it.
very fascinating.
You can,
And,
obviously. I enjoy
Looking
it.
forward to hearing some more music tonight, and
Well,
I hope that bass behaves for you this evening.
I've been down there for 2 hours. I found a crack. There's a crack in it. Crack in the bass
Uh-huh.
head. So I fortunately, one of the engineers
Okay.
was very kind. I ran into him on the street, and boy, he just saved me. He spent an hour with me, and
Good.
so I got it.
Well, on behalf of Hamilton College, I want to thank you for joining us, and look forward to your playing tonight.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay.